Hello everyone, welcome again. In this video, we are going to demonstrate a very powerful intraday technique, which is primarily based on the three indicators. One is Guppy moving averages. Basically, Guppy relies on 12 exponential moving averages, six of them being short-term moving averages, and the remaining six being long-term moving averages. We'll also use our awesome oscillator, and in addition to that, we'll also be using the central pivot. So all these indicators should be generally available with most of the broker terminals. For today's demonstration, I am using Zerodha. So I have here with me, a 15-minute chart. So basically, the time frame that we are looking at is 15 minutes. Since it's going to be an intraday trade. So we'll start applying the indicators one by one. So the first indicator that we're going to apply is the awesome indicators. So just type. You should find it in the list of studies. So I apply this indicator. It's basically an oscillator, more like an histogram, which indicates the trend of the stock or the market. So I don't change anything here. I let it with the default settings. In fact, I let all three indicators with its default settings as given by Zerodha. So yeah. So this is what we're going to do. So second indicator that I'm going to use is, as I mentioned, Guppy. So Guppy again, it's basically, six short-term and six long-term moving averages. So again, here I'm not going to change anything. I let the default settings as it is. So the Guppy moving averages, the long-term and the short-term EMAs are standard ones. So it should be is the same for all the broker terminals, right? So the third indicator I will be using it is basically the central pivot. So this is what I'll be doing. So now this is how overall your chart looks with all three indicators applied. Okay. So now the technique that we follow here is basically why we need three indicators is basically to have a kind of double confirmation before we enter into the trade. So that's the reason why we are using multiple indicators as part of this particular trading technique. So now in this chart I have IB real estate. So this illustration is primarily for a long trade. So I will explain the entry criteria for a long trade. So the first entry criteria is that on the awesome indicator, you see that the histogram is above zero line, right? So here, if you can see, the histogram is above the zero line. The second criteria here is your stock price should be above the central pivot range, right? The third criteria that is required here is, as I mentioned, Guppy has basically 12 overall 12 moving averages. The ones in red color is the short-term moving averages, and the ones in the blue color, what you see here is the long-term moving averages, right? So the so the third condition for entry is basically three of the short-term moving averages out of the six, at least three of them should have closed or crossed over the long-term moving averages, right? I mean, it will be good if all six of them are above the long-term moving averages. But sometimes, in waiting for that, you might lose out on the best price to enter the trade. So it is up to you, depending on your risk appetite. You can probably wait for, if you really have to wait for the full confirmation, you let all of these short-term moving averages cross over the long-term moving averages, right? So now this is a very, very good setup because I mean, for me, as I mentioned, the CPR as the pivot range is very, very narrow here, which is again a very good indication of a trend that is established. Secondly, as you can see that there's a cluster formed here wherein the moving averages are kind of narrowing their bands, right? So it's a very, very extremely good setup, right? So now for the entry condition, as I mentioned, the oscillator has to be awesome oscillator has to be above zero. Second is your stock price should be above the central pivot range. Thirdly, at least three of the short-term moving averages should have closed above uh, the long-term moving averages. So generally, I prefer to take this trade only on the crossovers, which means if there is already an established trend, probably I will not enter into the trade again, on this, right? So here, if you look at it, my entry criteria would be, around 63.9, right? As you can see that IB real estate made a high of 69, which is almost 10%. Of course, this is very exceptional case, but even otherwise, you should expect a very good returns on this particular trade. So in terms of stop loss, generally I prefer to keep a stop loss of 1% with a risk reward ratio of minimum 1:1. This is what I'm looking at in this particular setup. Okay, so now this is an explanation for the long trade. Now let's also take an example of a short trade. So for this illustration, I will probably take Indus Bank for a short trade. Yeah, so the short trade it is quite similar in the sense it is opposite of the conditions that is required for a long only trade, right? So as you can see here, first thing is to have the price of the stock below the pivot range, which is the case here. Secondly, the awesome oscillator should have the histogram should be below zero, which is also the case. And thirdly, the short-term moving averages, which are the lines in the red color, should have crossed below the long-term moving averages, which are in blue color. So I will enter into this trade at this point because I wait for at least three of the moving averages to close below the long-term moving averages. So my entry is at it's for a short trade. My entry is at 1407, right? And if, as you can see that IndusInd Bank made a low of 1389, which is more than 1.5% returns, for an intraday trade. So this is an extremely good setup, especially when the market is trending. You can really end up making huge amount of profits. I mean, as I always mention in my previous videos, you would have actually heard about it. Please apply these indicators, practice it, and then you jump into the real trades. I hope this video has been informative. If you like this video, please like the video, and also don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.